Let's look at power series solutions of second-order differential equations with an initial value. For example, find the first four non-zero terms in a power series expansion about x equals 0 that is a general solution to the initial value problem y double prime minus 6xy equals 0, y of 0 equals 7, y prime of 0 equals 12. Here's why we call this an initial value problem. We're trying to solve this differential equation, and we have these two initial values. We know what y is at 0, and we also know what y prime is at 0. So here's our differential equation. Since we know initial values, we can use the Taylor series formula. Taylor series formula is usually presented in this format. I'm going to replace f with y since we're dealing with y's. So y of x is the sum of the nth derivative of y at 0 times x to the n over n factorial. In other words, it's going to be y of 0 plus y prime of 0 x plus y double prime of 0 x squared over 2 factorial plus y triple prime of 0 x cubed over 3 factorial plus the fourth derivative of y at 0 times x to the fourth over 4 factorial, etc. So this is a Taylor series. More precisely, it's a Maclaurin series because it's about x equals 0. So again, here's our differential equation. Here's the Taylor series. We know what y of 0 is. We're told that y of 0 is 7. And we know what y prime of 0 is. That's 12. So we were told those initially. We need to figure out y double prime, y triple prime, etc. at 0. Here's how we find y double prime. We know this differential equation, y double prime minus 6xy equals 0. Move the 6xy to the other side, and we have y double prime equals 6xy. Well, that's a relatively easy way to evaluate y double prime. Plug in x equals 0. We get y double prime of 0 equals 6, okay, times x, which is 0, times y of 0. In other words, it's going to be 6 times 0 times 7, which is just plain 0. So y double prime is going to be 0. Y double prime of 0 is 0. Let's find y triple prime. To find y triple prime, we take the derivative of y double prime. We use the product rule. By the product rule, y triple prime, the derivative of y double prime, is going to be the first, 6x, times the derivative of the second, that's going to be y prime, plus the second, y, times the derivative of the first, which is just plain 6. So in other words, we get 6xy prime plus 6y. So y triple prime of 0 is going to be 6x y prime of 0 plus 6y of 0. In other words, it's going to be 6 times 0 times 12 plus 6 times 7. That is 0 plus 42, in other words, 42. So y triple prime of 0 is 42, the answer to life, the universe, and everything. How about the fourth derivative? Well, you know the routine. To find the fourth derivative of y, we take the derivative of the third derivative. Here's the third derivative of y. We found that in the previous step. So the fourth derivative, again by the product rule, is going to be the first, 6x, times the derivative of the second, derivative of y prime will be y double prime, plus the second, y prime, times the derivative of the first. Derivative of 6x is just going to be 6. And then, of course, we have to take the derivative of 6y. That'll just be 6y prime. So notice what we end up with. We get 6xy double prime. Okay, this ends up over here. These are both 6y prime. So 6y prime and 6y prime, those add up to 12y prime. So the fourth derivative of y at 0 is just going to be 6y double prime, 6xy double prime, plus 12y prime. Plug in x equals 0, and we get the fourth derivative of y at 0 is going to be 6xy double prime. In other words, 6 times 0 times y double prime of 0, plus 12y prime of 0. In other words, it's going to be 0 plus 12 times 12, which is 144. And we're done. That's enough. That's all we need. So here again is the power series for y of x. Let's plug in what we know. Y of 0 is 7. Y prime of 0 is 12. Those were the initial values we knew. Y double prime is 0. Y triple prime of 0 is 42. And the fourth derivative, y quadruple prime of 0, is 144. We can simplify a little bit. This just goes away. 42 over, 3 factorial is 6, and 4 factorial is 24. So we end up with this. Simplify, 42 over 6 is 7, 144 over 24 is 6. So we end up with this as the power series. Or if we just take the first 4 non-zero terms, this is going to be the power series for y of x. So y of x is 7 plus 12x plus 7x cubed plus 6x to the 4th.